Turnovers, injuries, not the best football around the league in Week 11, but there were some highlights. That's what we're going to talk about today on Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the Stealing Signals newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his work over at RotoViz. And Shawn, maybe we should just talk about my Huskies, who are 11-0.
11-0, getting ready to win the college football playoff, right? I mean, you're giving them a big advantage on Georgia and whoever comes out of that.
Well, my
brawl.
My favorite thing right now is they're like heavily. They're going to be pretty big underdogs. They're going to be more than 3-point underdogs in the Pac-12 championship to Oregon, it seems. If you look at like the betting futures odds to win the Pac-12 championship, they suggest a money line in that game that would suggest at least like a 4.5-point or 5-point spread.
Then you just spent a half an hour explaining to me why your team having a season like the Minnesota Vikings had last year sets them up to be the best team in the country.
That's not what I said. No, this is like a real discussion point. So I can't make our listeners listen to it, but they've won a bunch of close games. They've also played a lot of really tough teams. The Pac-12 is actually strong this year, and after non-conference play, people were talking about it as potentially being the best conference in the nation. Anyway, we're going to talk about pro football now, Shawn. It wasn't a very exciting week. We had we had Devon Achane was coming back, and then he barely played, goes out right away. And then we got to watch Savon Ahmed score a touchdown on a play that I'm sure you had the same thought as me, is like that was an Achane play in the playbook this week. Like that was the little route that Achane was supposed to be running. You mentioned also Kenneth Walker goes out. That's an oblique, has a history of sports hernia stuff. That could be a multi-week injury. I mean, they play on Thanksgiving. He's probably not going to be ready by Thursday. They made him doubtful right away. So we get some more injuries. Obviously, Thursday night football, Shawn, was pretty disastrous for fantasy football. To lose Mark Andrews, to lose Joe Burrow for the season, both of them. I mean, Burrow was just starting to play well. The Bengals were starting to really get going, at least for fantasy perspective. Obviously, Andrews, a huge hit to the tight end landscape, which has been deep for the first time in a lot of years. But not a good week for injuries, not a good week. Even stuff like I told the listeners that I thought Justin Jefferson would be back in the minimum. He doesn't come back again this week, and it looks like now what I was really concerned about is if he doesn't come back in the minimum. They only had 3 games until their bye. I don't see why they'd bring him back next week, 1 week before their bye. So he's probably going to miss 7 games and then the bye and then be back. It's not fun when good players are not on the field.
I mean, you want to embrace these Sundays and all the good things as opposed to dreading, which players you're going to lose. And that's always been part of it. I think that the fantasy part and the human part together, where we know that some of these guys are suffering injuries that, are going to cause some detrimental life effects. But that is kind of the way it goes. And we did have some entertaining games today as well. And we had a lot of turnovers, and something that has been more or less a theme of the last decade, and it's just so striking when you do kind of cut the NFL into eras, is you'll see the superstars of 30, 40, 50 years ago were much looser with the ball than the worst quarterbacks of today. You also see, through the last 10, 15 years, when guys fumble, they get benched and they don't get more opportunities for a while because losing those fumbles is so demoralizing to your team. I don't feel like we've necessarily seen quite as much of that recently. And there is some little tiny part in the back of your head that wonders if that's one of the reasons you have a game or a day like today. Ben, some of our favorite teams, the Washington Commanders, were out there against the Giants. Now, granted, it is the Giants, and so they probably should have won this game fairly easily. But Ben, they were down 5-0 in turnover margin as Sam Howell is trying to lead them to the game-winning drive, which does end up with the sixth turnover, which is a pick six. So they lose with a 6-0 turnover margin there. We have a game where the Detroit Lions fight back from a deficit that it definitely did not appear they were going to overcome. The Lions lose the turnover battle 4-1. They lose the time of possession battle 40-19. They still do win that game because they have a lot of good players and they were able to attack late. You look at the Miami Dolphins, you mentioned we lose Achane early on. And I mean, this is a game where the Las Vegas Raiders are coming off of two performances where they get back-to-back victories, but over two of the worst teams in football. But they had a shot at this Dolphins team today, which I think is probably not a great sign for the Miami Dolphins who are playing at home. The Dolphins do average over 6 yards per play in this one. Obviously, that's a good number. They were still moving the ball. They get another huge score from Tyreek Hill. They're able to hold Josh Jacobs in check. That's the key thing you need to do on defense. And yet you get to the end of this one and they do not put this Raiders team away. It's a couple of interceptions on the final drives from Aiden O'Connell that allowed them to seal the game. When you're thinking about these games, and obviously Giants Commanders is really only relevant from a fantasy perspective. You have a massive game today from Saquon Barkley where he looked, back to where he looked as a rookie. Just this sensational talent along the lines of, what we talk about with Bijan Robinson, we're hoping to get from someone like a Breece Hall once the offense works. But the games that are actually more relevant to fantasy and reality together, the games that are really interesting. I mean, this would have been an apocalyptic loss for the Lions that they avoid. It's a game that the Dolphins really needed to win fairly easily. When you're looking at those two, either of those two games jump out to you as being kind of the statement game of the weekend?
I don't know that there was like a statement game of the weekend. I think you made really good points. It was concerning for me with the Dolphins. I guess I thought that in my head, as I was watching it, I was making excuses like, man, they were probably just really geared up to have Achane in this game plan and him going out right away, kind of. Because I think part of their struggles the last couple of weeks have been, Waddle hasn't been right and Achane's been out, and they've wanted to be this really concentrated offense that only has like 4 stars and 2 of them aren't playing. And so you have Tyreek Hill and you have Mostert. And that's, they don't have anyone else. It's like they're trying to work in like Cedric Wilson, there's not a lot else there. Ahmed's an interesting third running back. But how many running backs are going to be your top 5 best skill players? You need other pass catchers is what it comes down to.
And this is a game where even though he hasn't really been involved, Durham Smythe is out. They do end up being actually very concentrated. 19 targets to Hill and Waddle, no more than 4 to any other player. Now, they do have more total guys with targets than they have in some games. But, outside of Tyreek Hill, you have Raheem Mostert carries 22 times, which isn't a huge problem for them, but he averages under 4 yards per carry, which is a little bit unique with how explosive he is. Tua averages over 8 yards per pass. He goes over 300 yards, and yet, it was another game where outside of those amazing plays from Tyreek Hill, they look pretty bad.
Yeah, but it is like this. I guess the reason I said I don't know if there's like a statement game is these are the types of games where I question how much they were really trying, basically, which is kind of a weird way of putting it. It was a close enough game that you think they would have been doing something. They could have lost this game, to your point. The Raiders had the ball late in the fourth quarter multiple times, down 7. And if they can drive down and score and they decide to go for 2, they can win this game, right? They can just win it right there. But there is the element in the NFL where it's a long season and teams don't want to show everything. And Mike McDaniel might be at this point starting to look ahead, I think, to the playoffs and keeping some of his cards up his sleeve a little bit. You're facing Aiden O'Connell at home. So is there an amount of this that they end up running Raheem Mostert 22 times. And he isn't particularly efficient in this game. And they weren't even really a lot of creative runs. It was a lot of just straightforward running when they had the lead in the second half. I'll be interested to see their pass rate over expected, some of that stuff. You mentioned that a few of their other guys had targets that don't necessarily do. There seemed to be some little design plays like that. But for the most part, I felt like it was a pretty bland version of the Dolphins. And the only thing that would have shook that up in my mind would have been Achane getting an opportunity to do some stuff in the passing game. And I bring up the Ahmed play because he does run a route and catch a TD that looks like an Achane route, basically. And my immediate thought was that's Achane would have been out there for that, but he was off the field at that point. He only has the 2 touches in the game. But I think there's a possibility that Achane would have been that other receiving threat, basically, in this game. Could have had 5 or 6 catches. Ahmed ends up having the 3. Anyway, yeah, it wasn't an impressive performance for Miami. At the same time, if you ask them, they're probably pretty comfortable with a low-key win over an Aiden O'Connell quarterback team at home. Maybe they took them a little too lightly, but also maybe they were just trying to get a win against an inferior opponent.
Anytime that you win in the NFL, we've seen a lot of really bad losses. You can think back to half of the games the Bills have played this year. You think to the Chiefs' loss against the Broncos. But the Dolphins, especially at home, were really putting their stamp on this season early. And now this is a game where in the second half, the Raiders had – they had more punts than this, but 2 of their drives were 3 and outs. 3 of their drives were interceptions. And a couple of those came late where maybe the Dolphins weren't trying as hard to score. But the Raiders don't score in the second half and the Dolphins just get 2 field goals. You really need to see more from them. It was also yet another game where Tyreek Hill spent a decent amount of time on the sideline, which, when he's not in and those other guys are not doing much, then you lose even more explosiveness. It does seem like he will probably be fine. But, the contrast with this Dolphins team here and with another team that, was kind of looking to make a statement coming off of the 3 losses. They get the win last week and they're playing the Bucs today. To me, the team that looked the most impressive on Sunday was the San Francisco 49ers. You get contributions again from all of the different pieces, even though Debo's aren't incredibly important, but you get the long touchdown to Brandon Ayuk. You get another touchdown from George Kittle. You get a lot of touches for Christian McCaffrey and a receiving touchdown from him. As a result of the touchdown going through the air, you get the 3 different touchdowns for Brock Purdy, who, if you're playing that 49ers Commanders Week 17 matchup in best ball, you continue to have to be pretty excited about most of the pieces here. The 49ers looked really good.
I've seen some people suggest that that's going to end up being the stack that wins it, because so many other, of the other big high-profile games have been hit by injuries, but that is the one that is trucking along.
And so I've got a lot of enthusiasm for that. That was one of our highest exposure plays. The other side of this game, you do get Mike Evans getting in. You get some Raheem Jarrett, 41-yard gain. Cade Otton drops a touchdown late that would have perhaps closed this one up. Got a lot of talk on the telecast about Baker Mayfield's competitiveness. Was that the main takeaway that you had, that Baker really competed? The people I was watching the game with wanted the biggest takeaway to be that his State Farm commercials a couple years ago were underrated, more so than his play on the field. He does get 45 passes off in this one. Takes 4 sacks, throws a pick, averages under 6 yards per attempt. This is another game where Rachaad White does nothing on the ground and yet has a very good fantasy game. Rachaad White is absolutely dominating at this point. This game is exactly like you would expect, but it was a pretty fun game.
Yeah, White's been a really great example of that back that we've talked about for a long time. That's sort of the idea of the high value touches and all of that, where if you have size and you are able to catch passes and you're good in the receiving game, if you have that combination, because the size will lead to the goal line work, the touchdown upside and the receiving. I mean, you don't even necessarily need to be an efficient player. And he's been efficient in the pass game for the most part. Today, not really. Only 28 yards on 7 targets, 6 catches. He catches a lot of the targets thrown to him, though. He has a really strong catch rate, which is, a slightly different type of efficiency, but still a good metric. He's been good in the yardage department receiving as well. Really, really poor rushing. But that doesn't matter. Like, those are the low value touches, right? The rushing yards, like, they don't matter. I mean, if you can catch the targets and get the PPR points for those, and if you're efficient as a receiver, that you have the potential in the passing game to break off a lot more chunk yardage on those touches. So if you're more efficient on those touches, you can have a day like, today, not even really a great example, but 30 rushing yards, 28 receiving yards, winds up with 58 total yards. There's some other games where he's had 50, 60 receiving yards, and he pushes, 100 total yards, or even, not even quite that, because he's only rushing for 30 or 35, but he's able to push 80, 90 total yards, get some PPR or half PPR points for the receptions, have some touchdown equity with the size element. It's a pretty good profile.
And it's not exactly the size back, but the thing we talked about on our sort of projection show with Jahmyr Gibbs and how easily he was going to be able to get to points. And then if he actually got volume, he would get to extreme points. I mean, Gibbs' line almost identical today to that of Rachaad White, where the yardage, he's right there at 100. So that's fine, right? But when you add the 6 receptions and you add a touchdown, his happens to be in the rushing game as opposed to the receiving game. And those 12 points with the 1 TD and the 6 receptions, that makes it so that the yardage is almost gravy. When we think about this Lions team coming back, this is probably the most disappointing team of the weekend through 3.5 quarters, and then they make that great push in the 4th. And I think they had to come away with it feeling like maybe this is the most important game of the season for them, because they do escape. You need to win sometimes when you don't play that well. Obviously, they committed a lot of turnovers, but they were able to mix David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs together. Gibbs, again, looked absolutely fantastic. You have yet another game where these teams have to be looking to shut Amon-Ra St. Brown down, and he does it yet again, and he gets the key touchdown to kind of keep them alive in the first half of the game, where they, again, were atrocious as well. And then we've seen this happen over and over, and by over and over, I just mean a handful of times, but across the last year, ever since Jameson Williams came back from that ACL tear, where he gets behind the defense and Jared Goff misses him. In this game, he was so wide open that Goff, he threw a decent pass, but it would have been very difficult to miss him in this one. The speed element, we talked about how Williams was going to get some catches that mattered at some point. The deep strike here and how that kind of opens their offense up, and opens it up in a game where, frankly, this is far and away the worst game that Jared Goff has played this year, and yet he made the key throws in the key moments.
Yeah, and they went right back to him on the next drive, too. As they were trailing, he became more of the passing game. It became clear that they wanted to attack and score quickly. I saw something that said that because the Bears in this game scored to go up 26-14 with 4 minutes and 15 seconds left, and they kick off up 12 at that point. They kicked a field goal at that point to go from 9 to 12 points. I thought that was a little bit odd. It was a 4th and 5 at the 21. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, I guess 9 is just a touchdown and a field goal. You can lose by 1, but the difference between 9 and 12 doesn't really feel that sharp to me. And so I was at the time thinking, man, I hope that doesn't come back and bite them. And it did. The Lions attacked and were quick and were able to score in about looks like a minute, 16 seconds or so. And Goff hit Jameson Williams for the 32-yard TD that you just described. They get a quick 3 and out, call a couple timeouts, Bears only get 1 yard on their 3 downs and then have to punt. And the Lions get the ball back with 2:33 and they're down 5 now. So they take that 12-point deficit where what I was saying is I saw somebody on Twitter say that their win probability at that moment after they had scored and made it a 12-point game was like 98% or something, or 95%, whatever. Some really high metric, which everyone always says, well, it obviously wasn't that high if they lost. Well, no, I mean, in actuality, they probably would have won that game 19 out of 20 times. It probably was 95%, but the Lions executed incredibly well from that point where they were clearly in a tough spot. And there's a lot of their margins were very thin from that point on, but they were able to execute. The Bears were not able to get a first down when they needed to. And the Lions go on to win because of it. But yeah, I mean, the fact that the Lions were able to score so quickly in under a minute and a half, and they did it, like you said, by pushing to Jameson Williams downfield. And when they got the ball back the next drive, short pass to David Montgomery for 13 yards on the first play. Next play was, I'm just looking at the game log, incomplete pass deep left to Jameson Williams. That's the play I'm thinking of. Can't quite visualize it, but I know they took a shot to him right away to start that second drive. It was like, we're going to keep pushing to you. And then they ultimately had like an 11-play drive where they pieced things together a little bit. But he, I think, helped that as well because they went back the next play. They ran it. They're right before the 2-minute warning, and they run it for 12 yards on 2nd and 10 and get a first down. Some short passes to Gibbs, Laporta, Montgomery over the next few downs, some more running, and they're able to push all the way down the field. It ends up being a David Montgomery 1-yard rushing TD with like 29 seconds left, and they come back and they win this game. But we talked about this recently about how their offense was structured and how they've built through some of the underneath passing and the short passing and then sort of been more rotational with the outside receivers and the vertical element, but it still stresses the defense. And Jameson Williams is still so clearly the best of the outside receivers at stressing the defenses. And you saw that here where they hit for that TD, like you said. And then when they got the ball back the next drive, they took the shot early in that drive and it just opened everything up. It makes the whole package work. He's a clear, important part. What I said when we talked about this was I was concerned he might be better, like we've said with deep players before, better for the team, for the real life team than for fantasy. And that may still be a concern. He only winds up with 3 targets here. He does have the long TD, but how much can he really do if you're only getting a couple deep shots every week and you're more stressing the safeties so that there's room underneath for Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Laporta, Gibbs? It is challenging. However, within all of that, there's nuance. And in the end of this game, the point that I'm trying to emphasize is he became very important. He became the guy down the field more so than Josh Reynolds or the other Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones, the other rotational outside receivers that they have, vertical receivers that they have. It became clear that it was Jameson Williams when they were backs against the wall. And it would be cool to see if he could build on this a little bit.
And it may just be that it's what I really want to have happen, but I think that you should go out and, you still want to be very price sensitive and not, give up more than you need to or more than is appropriate. But I think you want to go out and acquire Jameson Williams this week. It's going to be a lot harder now after this touchdown, obviously, because, everybody reacts to the big play feeling like it could be the start of something. But you also have those Jameson Williams managers who are like, man, if this is the play that allows me to get rid of him at a decent price, I want to do it because I've been holding him now for all this time. When you have some situations like that, I would look at it because, his enthusiasm seems contagious. We've talked about how he's made big blocks downfield, and that's something that almost has to get him back in the good graces of the coaching staff, and certainly his teammates would enjoy. But again, I'm like everybody in that I tend to see the guys that I'm most interested in. I tend to see what they're doing the most clearly. But you think back to Thursday night and how there are so many disappointing things about it. And because of all the injuries, the relatively limited role from Keaton Mitchell, tends to end up being, less disappointing than just all these guys who aren't going to play anymore. He obviously doesn't do a ton. You get a couple more of those touchdowns for Gus Edwards. But I believe it's a long play to Zay Flowers where the other guy, 50, 60, 70 yards down the field, flying, just absolutely flying. And you can only do that if you have 4.3 speed. So it is kind of a beneficial type of thing for these guys like Jameson Williams, like Keaton Mitchell, when you can really run. But when there's a guy who's not really involved in the play, and gets 50 yards downfield to block for a teammate. If you want more snaps, if you want more routes, if you want more touches, go block 60 yards down the field. Your coach will like that. So, I mean, I'm
who else I saw do that today was our guy. Speaking of guys that we tend to see and be biased and see do these things, our guy Jackson Smith and Jigba motioned like on the inside on an important, like I think it was a 3rd and 1, if not a 4th and 1, and then sealed off his guy. Like he was basically the lead blocker on a play because he like came in, he got motioned into like an inline alignment and like hit the hole and had to get to the linebacker and sealed it off. And Charbonnet had a nice little run for a 1st down, and then he did a big flex after the play. He was really excited about his run block.
Very nice. He had a big play down the field early in the game that gets overturned, which obviously was the correct call. No, it
wasn't.
Both of his feet were out of bounds, but
they called it a catch on the field, and then they determined that there was inconclusive evidence that his first foot was off the ground when the ball hit his hands. It's very clear that then one foot gets down, the second one's on the line, but the one that winds up on the line was very split second whether it was still on the ground from the previous step when the ball hit his hands. Were you just making a joke that was a bad call? I thought that was a really weird overturn.
So you're saying that they should have kept it?
Yeah. I mean, they called it a catch on the field. I don't think that was conclusive. Was it definitely conclusive? The toe that went on the line was clearly on the line, but the step prior, I mean, it looked to me, they were showing all these slow-mos, and I'm like, I can't tell. I mean, obviously I wanted it to be a catch, but like, I'm like, there's no way you can overturn this. I can't tell that he definitely got his foot off the ground before the ball hit his hands. I mean, it was bang, bang, if anything, but they determined it was definitely conclusive.
My favorite one today was on quite possibly the most important punt of the weekend. Obviously, that's not true. The punt hits, because this is going to set the Cardinals up. It's going to set up, like, basically, in my mind, I'm thinking it's going to set up like 5 catches for Trey McBride. But from a more objective global perspective, it's going to set up Kyler Murray to either lead the Cardinals to victory or not, in which case CJ Stroud gets another big win. Then the ball is punted off a Texans player's back, and somehow it's incorrectly called on the field. And then despite like the most clear-cut image of it hitting the Texans guy in the back and not being anywhere close to a Cardinals player, that play is not overturned. Gene Steratore seemed to be a little confused about that one as well.
When you get him on, even after they say the call stands, they get him on the broadcast, and he's going, I mean, I don't know what to say. Like, I think that was very clear, and it has to be, inconclusive. I mean, it has to be whatever the word is I'm trying to think of. It has to be clear and obvious. But he's like, I think that was clear and obvious. Like, that should have been overturned. I mean, he was very blatant as the refereeing consultant, whatever we call them on the broadcast. I mean, I picked up on that conversation too, Shawn. I thought that was, it was very clearly the wrong call. I mean, the officials aren't very good. we could have a whole show on that. It was interesting. Right after that, Stroud throws interception. Stroud, a little bit of trouble today, throws 3 picks. He came into the game leading the NFL in interception percentage, had only thrown 2 all year. He's now up to 5. He's a rookie. He's still the truth. You're going to throw some picks. It's going to happen.
Yeah, you are. It was interesting, though, in that, I mean, this was a game the Cardinals should have won. And it's a game where he does make some mistakes. And so I think from the Texans' perspective, you've got to be really happy because, I mean, you're in a division there that has essentially no good teams. The Jaguars are only doing what they're doing because their schedule is unbelievably easy. And once these two teams face off down the stretch and you kind of look at at what's going to happen going forward. I mean, the Texans, with this win, with stealing this victory, are in really good shape, I think. And so for the Texans to escape in this game where you do get the picks, that's going to be exciting for them. The other thing that's going to be exciting for them is that, I mean, it's really hard to have a game with picks, with 3 picks, and with the picks being somewhat egregious. I mean, if you think about some of the other quarterbacks in the league who get piled on either for the picks or just in general, I mean, these passes would be looked at as really, really bad passes. But the other 34 passes were, again, fantastic. And, you know, at a certain point, one of the things that's going on here is that Tank Dell is really benefiting from the fact that the Texans have absolutely nobody. And yet everything that was said about him by his believers during the draft process and the kind of hilarious comments about how he ended up on the Texans because CJ Stroud wanted him, that all now looks genius. The diving, falling back touchdown catch that he makes, number one, the route running on it was spectacular and it gets wide open. And then the catch that he makes, I mean, this is another game where, I mean, Nico Collins is just a guy. Robert Woods completely washed. Dalton Schultz, just a below average tight end. All you really have to account for when you're facing the Texans is Tank Dell, and he goes 8 for 149 and 1 on his 10 targets. I mean, the volume and the efficiency here are crazy. And CJ Stroud, another game, over 9 yards per attempt. I mean, he's eviscerating these defenses.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the biggest things that I think, you know, it makes sense in terms of Stroud throwing the interceptions. What hasn't made sense, you mentioned, you know, the 9 yards per attempt, the fact that he's actually pushing the ball downfield. He continues to make a bunch of incredible throws. One of the recent stealing signals, you know, it's always hard to find like great QB stats, but I think I had completions that traveled 20 air yards or more. It was one of the stats I think I had, and he was tied for the league lead, which makes sense. But I don't know if it was travel 20 air yards or was completions of 20 yards, or, you know, there's obviously various ways we can do this, but he pushes the ball down the field. You mentioned it with the yards per attempt. If you're doing that,
they were talking today about the fact that the Texans only trailed the Lions, which I'm actually surprised that they did, in explosive plays coming in.
Yeah. So I mean, they're obviously up there is what I'm trying to say. There's a lot of different ways we could cut this stat. And when you look at the ways that he's throwing, he's doing, you know, rolling to one hash and throwing back across. You mentioned the Tank Dell kind of falling back, diving-ish touchdown today. That was an incredible throw. Extended play and just let it loose. And I mean, got it way downfield. That was the one that was right before half as well, where it was like the defense should have let him behind them. He does a good job to get that little bit of separation, but also it's just such an incredible throw in the situation. He's made so many of those. To your point, the interceptions were bad in and of themselves, but you're going to have those. I mean, there's a lot of good, real football analysts who have argued for a long time that you want interceptions, essentially. And I think that's kind of the wrong messaging, but that it's sort of been that interceptions come with good quarterback play, that there's, you know, one of the criticisms of Aaron Rodgers in his peak, because he was always a big interception avoider, was that he was too worried about not turning the ball over, that he would miss opportunities to push, especially when they were down. And somebody said it on Twitter recently. It was an old stat, but so I don't know that it's still true, and I doubt it is, but that like he had never come back and won a game by more than a 9-point deficit or something like that, which must have been true for some period of his career. I think it was, you know, several years ago that was the stat, but that was the point in the argument is when you're down, you have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to take shots. And even sometimes when early in games, when you're, you know, neutral situation or even leading, you have to be willing to press because it sets up schematically a lot of different things. So there's obviously situations like 3rd and longs where you can do it as sort of arm punts. I think Kevin Cole, obviously, you know, formerly of RotoViz, writing about some of Josh Allen's interceptions issues and mentioning that like 3 of them basically had no expected points added, the EPA metric, had like no negative EPA value because they were third and longs that were like really effective arm punts where he threw like a 50-yard pass and then got intercepted. So yeah, if 3 of your interceptions are like not even bad because it's such a low probability of converting this 3rd and 15 and you have a 50-yard interception and it becomes an arm punt. I mean, that's context. That's relevant, right? And so there are opportunities. We talked about this with Ryan Fitzpatrick late in his career, Shawn. We always loved this about him. When he would get behind, he'd be down by 2 scores. He was either going to go out, throw in interceptions like crazy, or he was going to, do the Fitzmagic stuff. And the reason he got that nickname is he always understood. And I mean, yeah, Harvard guy, right? But like there is the element where he always understood game situation, right? I have to be aggressive. It doesn't matter if I throw 4 interceptions at this point. And it's something that, people have tried to apply to Jameis Winston and stuff as well. I think it works for Jameis Winston when he's trailing. The issue with Jameis is he can sometimes get that erratic when he's also in situations where he shouldn't be necessarily as erratic as he can get to. But this is an important quality of quarterback play is what I'm getting at. And Stroud has it. And yes, in this situation, he throws some interceptions in spots where it is pretty bad. The 2 late interceptions, and particularly they were bad because they're in field goal range up 5 late in the game, in the 4th quarter. And he does it on 2 consecutive drives where, I mean, Houston getting a field goal there to go up 8 is a massive moment in the game. And I was a little bit shocked by both of those and a little bit concerned. At the same time, he's a rookie. He has done none of this to this point. He also had great throws in this game. It was still a strong game overall. As you noted, 9 yards per attempt. That long TD to Tank Dell, so impressive. It's not even like this was a bad game. There was a couple of bad throws. And again, you're right when you say that some of the other quarterbacks, when they make these throws, we'd be hammering for it. But it's also just, I mean, there are other quarterbacks where it'd be like, yeah, that's unlike them. We've seen so much good from them. We're not going to hold it against them. Like Patrick Mahomes has thrown bad interceptions. The point is everyone has mistakes. And this kid came into this game with 2 picks on the year, a couple bad ones in this game. Absolutely. It needs to not become a problem. He did have a high rate of turnover-worthy plays in college last year. That was one of my concerns with him in the transition. And looking at his stats, he had a good rate of big-time throws over at PFF, the way that they classify those. Also a high rate of turnover-worthy plays. So he looked like this guy who takes a lot of shots. And I've been, I'm doing this whole monologue here because I've been kind of, in the back of my mind, is another shoe going to drop where some of his aggressiveness starts to turn into some interceptions. I really hope we don't see this become an issue. But it can't be overstated how little this particular game was in terms of relative to the sample he's put out there. There's a couple of bad plays and it happens, right? I mean, it wasn't major.
No. And the margins that we've seen him be able to create by virtue of his ability to move and extend plays. I mean, he doesn't like to run, but it's great to, you have receivers on your roster from this team. You love those extended plays, and then the quality of the throws just doesn't really lend itself to a lot of these errors. And one of the things too now with the quarterback mobility being so important, you got a lot of the shorter quarterbacks who do struggle to make throws over the line. And that's the last thing that CJ Stroud has to worry about. Now, we are going to see him go through stretches where he's not as dominant as he's been. And you think back, for example, to how good Deshaun Watson was as a rookie. You can think about people from different positions, like how good Odell Beckham was, how good Saquon Barkley was. I mean, you think about Beckham and Barkley as examples of guys where we would have expected them to become just legendary fantasy pieces, and really they've been solid since their rookie seasons. And I just mentioned that just that I think that CJ Stroud is going to be solid. CJ Stroud is going to be a star. My point that I'd like to make here is that I'm really excited for when they add a true number one wide receiver to the mix, because then they're going to be that much more difficult to deal with. Balancing that, though, is just that, I mean, he's already played so well and put up such gaudy stats that even once they have that wide receiver one, something that's going to help them in reality, something that's going to help keep him at this incredibly high plateau, I mean, Ben, what he's done to this point is not sustainable. And so, we just have to keep our expectations in check. But you love to see.
That's basically what I'm trying to say is like we shouldn't be expecting him to not play like a rookie at times. The expectations, it's so easy to get ahead of ourselves. I keep seeing all the tweets that he should be in the MVP conversation, and I think he actually has a case to be in the conversation. But the interceptions late in this game, I think, are a big element why like he's probably not an MVP level quarterback yet. But like, so what, right? Like we don't have to do that.
I picked him ahead of Joe Burrow last week, and then Burrow got hurt, making it easy.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one of them still playing.
Right. If the Texans keep winning, we don't have interesting teams pushing for this. I mean, you've got, Prescott and Brock Purdy, maybe interesting guys in the conversation. I think that unless the Chiefs and the Eagles become more dynamic, then people are going to be reluctant to put Mahomes and Jalen Hurts probably has to be the guy, right? But when it comes down to Jalen Hurts and C.J. Stroud, if the Texans push and finish with...
It doesn't come down to those two. I mean, there's still Mahomes. There's still Lamar Jackson. There's still Tua if you want to... like if Miami closes well, if they get it back, like he'll be back in the discussion. He was leading in odds for a while. I mean, I agree with you that there's not a lot of interesting names, but that's when like Mahomes just wins another MVP. Like, I don't think that'll.
No. You can't give Mahomes the MVPs that he should have won when, for whatever reason, they were being given to Aaron Rodgers. You've got to win them in this year, and the Chiefs can like barely move the ball. It's got to be Hurts, or I would take your Lamar Jackson nomination there. I have a hard time with Tua. Tua we love, but he's been massively overshadowed by CJ Stroud. He's not been in the same level.
Yeah. No, he's not going to win it because people don't think that he is doing enough of it himself. I mean, whatever, like it or not, like it is a narrative-driven award, and Mike McDaniel's offense and Tyreek Hill's skills, those are the things that get the credit for why Miami is so good.
Are you going to put Tyreek Hill in the conversation? What are his
odds? I don't think. Well, for the reasons you just said, this is a really interesting conversation because for the reasons you just said, I could see this being. We've been saying as a NFL media community that it is now just a quarterback award and a non-quarterback's never going to win it again. I think this is a year that could actually happen, that voters could rally around somebody like Tyreek Hill. He would have to set the receiving yardage record, but he's probably going to. He had another 150 yards today. What's he?
I guess when it comes to the receivers, I am much more strongly behind retroactively giving Cooper Kupp the one that he should have obviously won.
Retroactively,
it should not have even been close.
No, I agree with that. He should have won that. Yeah, I think Tyreek's pacing for 2,000 still. The whole thing will be determined here in the next several weeks and the next final 2 months. I think the biggest element when we get to these stages in a season is to keep in mind that there's still a lot of football to play, and that what happens from here on out is going to be the stuff that weighs the most on the voters' mind. So,
but you want to get your message out there early, establish some momentum. Yeah. You've got me fired up. I've got my CJ Stroud bandwagon going, Ben. So,
it's possible. I'm not saying it's not, but I think what we're going to see, Shawn, is the Chiefs actually score some points over the last couple months, and Mahomes wins it. That's my take.
He's not even on my ballot. We look on the other side here. And Kyler Murray rushes for 51 yards. He scores an electric rushing touchdown. They get Rondale Moore deep early. And Ben, if this had happened a couple of years ago, we would have opened with this. We would have talked about this for 35 minutes. we would have talked about how Rondell Moore does not have to have a 0 ADOT. Of course, things did go off the rails a little bit from there. Greg Dorsch leads in targets with 8. Marquise Brown and Rondell Moore only combined for 6 targets, and only one of those goes to Rondell. The Cardinals only score 6 in the second half. These drives late after the Stroud interceptions end on downs, and they end on weak punt-like throws from Kyler. Now, this is the second game back for him. We know that the Cardinals probably are not top to bottom that strong of an NFL team. We know that Joshua Dobbs has looked better with the Vikings than with the Cardinals. Where are you at with Murray through a couple of games here and with this offense? We do like to see, and in part, again, it's because we have a lot of exposure. Trey McBride, 7 targets, 5 receptions, very involved. But, I mean, one of the frustrations, I think, both with the Cardinals, one of the things we were talking about with the Commanders is that they've gotten rid of the sacks, but they've also gotten rid of passes to their receivers. I'm concerned that Murray still doesn't have the passing ability to be not just like a Super Bowl quarterback, because a little bit of who wins those Super Bowls is going to be fluky. The playoffs are going to have some randomness, but you want your guy to be able to get you to the playoffs year in and year out, and every once in a while get you a bye. Considering that there were a lot of positives in this game as well, do you feel like it's too early to go right back in and say, I mean, Murray's passing does not look up to the level that you need? It's really interesting here, given all of the rhetoric kind of in the background about how the Cardinals may be wanting to move on from him. The enthusiasm after that first touchdown pass to Rondell Moore seemed very, very real. Head coach, QB, that type of relationship. And yet the problems that the offense had with Cliff Kingsbury, I mean, they manifested in a very meaningful way in the second half of the game that should have been a shootout, kind of looked like a shootout from a fantasy manager perspective. To only get 6 points in the second half of this game was, one of the downers of the week.
Yeah, this had a really high over-under and looked like it was going to blow through it in the first half. And then just, like you said, completely stopped scoring. I think your perspectives on Kyler and some of the passing stuff are interesting because I think it depends where you're coming at it from. You, I think, have been more optimistic about Kyler than I have. I've been coming at it with some pessimism and talked about not thinking he was going to look great when he came back right away. And so I mean, not necessarily the passing, more the mobility, but I've been really excited about him the last 2 games. And it's been fun to watch him and be like, man, this guy is a fun watch. He's so electric with the ball in his hands. You forget how quick he is. He runs. He's got an interesting run style with his short little legs, but I mean, he scoots, right? And he had about a 40-yard run called back by a downfield hold. I think he still got like 20 of those yards because it was a little bit downfield. Ended up with 50-plus rushing yards. Everything you were just saying there reminds me a little bit of Justin Fields as well, who we actually saw come out and get a lot of designed runs early in this game. Similar thing. We got to see his athleticism, and it's something that we've been calling for Fields, and it's nice to see, and hopefully will be a big part of what they do. And they probably should have beat the Lions in this game. Man, they have a hard time putting teams away. It has been a big story of Justin Fields' short career so far that the wins and losses haven't been there, and there have been a lot of these games where they get out ahead sometimes, and they end up not doing a good job of putting these games away.
As you're kind of bringing Fields up, I did want to mention earlier, I thought it was an interesting play, an interesting kind of sequence at the very end there. I always think it's tough on the quarterback if you're willing to throw once on this final drive to make that throw on a 3rd and long, as opposed to you could come out and throw it on 1st down and put your team in a good situation when the throw isn't expected. And then you could run twice if you were more or less committed to having at least 2 runs in that sequence, but maybe they would make more sense. They would do more for you there. But the throw that he actually makes right? You get a cool route here from Tyler Scott, who gets open deep, and Fields made a remarkable downfield throw, incredibly accurate. And Scott ran a great route, gets open, and then as he gets open, when he looks back, he stutters for just a second. Not a second, I mean like an instant, right? And that slows him just enough that the ball is just off of his hands. I mean, Fields can't know that he's going to slow right at the crucial moment as he decides to look over his shoulder and try to pick up the ball. I mean, you can't blow your route there after you've gotten open, because if he doesn't slow down, then that's a massive game and the game is over.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, Fields made a play here at the end that if his receiver does his part, you win it. And so I'm not saying that Fields passed the ball beautifully, although another good game for DJ Moore. Certainly not saying that he was flawless in this game, but it was too bad that, I mean, obviously we wanted the additional Lions points and I wanted the Lions to win. But from a Bears perspective, it's too bad that play didn't work because Fields did his part of it. And the young receiver, if he could have made that catch, it would have been really cool for him.
Yeah, I mean, so Fields, to me, the comparison to Murray and what you're saying about the passing, I mean, is he was that. I mean, it's a bummer that they lose this game, but they compete really well on the road at a really good Detroit team that for some people are in the Super Bowl discussion. And I would put myself among those some people because I do think this Detroit team has sort of all the pieces. I mean, their defense may be a little bit suspect, but when you have an offensive line like that and you can do the things they can do consistently from like a success rate standpoint in this era of the NFL, offensively, I think they can contend with anyone, can beat anyone, and could easily represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. And then it's a one game thing. To go in there and to probably should have won, right? And it was that you were just talking about, you want your quarterback to be good enough to be able to take you to the playoffs consistently, maybe even get you in the mix for the 1 seed. Fields feels like a far away, that feels distant for him, but they brought him back from his injury and said, we're actually going to use you the way that we should, which they did at the end of last season. And they again tried to take out of this. And I was thinking about this during this game with Fields, and I didn't mean to just completely come off of the Kyler conversation, but I'm watching Fields and I'm going, man, like, I just wish we had more coaches that let these guys be the best versions of themselves and not worry about, obviously it's scary if they can get injured and some of those things, but you can't make them play in a way that isn't their style of playing. And then it's just not there's no positive outcome there, right? Now there is risk. I mean, you could argue Shane Steichen does an incredible job with Anthony Richardson in this regard, and then Anthony Richardson does end up taking too many hits. I mean, he needs to learn to protect himself a little bit better, and so there's a lot of young quarterbacks that do. That has been some of the concern with Fields. The fact that they came out in this game and they said, we're going to use your designed run ability to get them into the defenses that then allow you to throw on them, because he's a really good deep passer. We've talked about this before. He has great touch down the field. He ends up hitting DJ Moore for the later touchdown that you just referenced. Moore ends up with a nice 7-catch, 96-yard in 1 TD game in a game where Fields only throws 23 passes and for 169 yards because they do lead. They do run the ball. Fields 18 carries, 104 yards in this game. More carries than any of the running backs. I mean, not the running backs combined, but that's I think the blueprint for winning with Justin Fields is this. And I think
you just run him until he gets hurt, though, and then go to the next guy. Because, I mean, he can't take that many hits in games consistently.
I don't know that it's inevitable. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, Lamar's has run a ton. I think these guys do a pretty good job of protecting themselves. I think Fields has gotten pretty good at that. A lot of the runs today were, sweeps around the edge. He's going out of bounds on a lot of them. Some of the data that was, shown with some of these rushing QBs was that they, I think once we get more and more of that data, and Shawn, you and I have talked about this before, we're going to find that the running QBs do get hurt more. I mean, it's just going to be inevitable. It's the same deal with the running backs. The more carries you have, the more hits you take from NFL players, the more likely you are to get hurt. The more sacks that you take as a quarterback, the more likely you are to get hurt. I mean, all this stuff is...
Well, and some of the issues with the running quarterbacks, once you get up to the total numbers that Fields was up to today, then you're getting a lot of risk, especially then if some of those same guys are also taking a bunch of hits from the passing perspective as well, right? Because
yeah,
it's not just
18 carries is way too many. Yeah, I mean, to be clear, that's a crazy high number.
I would love to see it. I would love to see it because if he could play a whole season like that, you know, and it is something that Lamar Jackson has done very effectively. Now, and a lot of the plays, both of these guys do get down, right? And so it's not like they're taking running back hits every play. But the other thing is that, I mean, the Ravens' last 2 seasons were destroyed by Lamar Jackson getting hurt. And so it's very tough. I mean, Fields looked great today. I wish that he could have won. When you think about the Cardinals, are you saying that you want even more rushing from him with how dynamic he looks?
No, what I was saying was that I think Kyler actually has a coach now in Jonathan Gannon who looks like he's capable of, number one, understanding that he needs to fit his scheme to his personnel. Number two, getting the most out of who those personnel are. He did an incredible job with Joshua Dobbs, I thought. Obviously, wasn't like perfect. And Dobbs has looked even better now that he's gone on to Minnesota. But this was a team that had a win total over under of 4.5, and they might still go under that. But it was like way lower than every other team. And they came out more competitive like early on. They beat the Cowboys. I mean, like it's hilarious that they're 2-9 now because they have actually won a really strong game against the Cowboys, and we're very competitive in some other games against some good teams. I think Gannon is a good coach for Kyler. I think what we've seen the first 2 weeks that Kyler's been back is a lot of mobility, a lot of smart play calls. They had a touchdown run today on I saw somebody break it down on Twitter where it's basically showing the zone read, but then the running back releases and becomes the lead blocker. So you're kind of showing that it's going to be the pull, but like James Conner ends up being the lead blocker. Kyler ends up getting around the edge and getting in for a rushing TD. That ties back into some of the passing because obviously Kyler does have a height issue, which you've referenced on the show. In terms of being able to see over the line and a lot of those things, I think if you want to win with Kyler Murray, you do need to let him be mobile. He needs to be able to get out of the pocket and get around and get better sight lines with some consistency, right? And you need to challenge defenses enough that they're then putting the spies on the field, sometimes maybe only rushing 3 guys, and then that might actually help you open up some of the vision lanes between the line of scrimmage if you are concerned about that. If there aren't 4 or 5 guys coming in all being blocked at the line of scrimmage, and instead you have only 3 rushers and a couple of spies, and your offensive linemen are double teaming each 2 of those 3 guys, there's less engagement on the offensive line. There's bigger throwing windows when there's fewer, D linemen pursuing. And that happens with the spies. Again, the spies, essentially, for anyone who doesn't know, are just like linebackers who are sitting back a little bit, waiting for Kyler to break the pocket and try to run, and then they're going to attack. But if they're doing that and just trying to make him stand back there and throw, that might help, again, with the issue of the sight lines and some of those things. I guess I want to see more of him in Jonathan Gannon's offense was sort of going to be work my way all the way back to Kyler. And the fact that we got 7 carries, 51 yards, a TD from him, it could have been even better. Like I said, he loses some of those rushing yards on a downfield hold. The passing wasn't where it needs to be, but it's his second game throwing in a live NFL game. He hasn't had any preseason action, in 11 months, right? Like I'm not holding it against him that he was checking down to Greg Dortch a bunch. This is his second preseason game, essentially. Like, he was checking out a Greg Dortch a bunch. Like, that's going to happen.
Well, I mean, he did practice some before they activated him. But, yeah, I think both of those things are true. I just think it'll be an interesting team to track as we go forward, because it's not just that Dortch has all of these checkdowns, but in the 2 games back. And part of this is that, Marquise Brown, probably not an impact receiver. But I think when you look at the way that they're set up, especially in today's game where Michael Wilson is not available, for Marquise Brown to have 9 targets in the 2 games as opposed to in each game and only 3 receptions, that is disconcerting. I think when you look at the situation where we referenced that after both of the interceptions that the Cardinals turned the ball back over on downs, both of the 4th down throws were non-competitive. The very final one, a little bit of a throw up there. The previous drive, he has Trey McBride wide open for the conversion and has a lane. You talked about trying to get that throwing lane for him. And as he makes the throw, the ball comes out of his hands sideways. And so it certainly seemed like it may just have been a situation where the ball slipped, which, I mean, all of us playing catch have had that happen, but it's a weird, unfortunate time for an NFL quarterback to have it in a game situation, or he saw something.
You're saying he has tiny baby hands is what you're saying, right?
It was a weird pass. I was trying to figure out how he had accomplished it. It was kind of one of those things where potentially he saw something and actually tried to pull the ball back. I mean, the ball came out really, really poorly. It was hard to understand exactly what happened there. But I guess as we follow the Cardinals, I do want to see more volume to the impact receivers, and then you'd like to see them continue that volume to Trey McBride. Mostly you want to see more passing efficiency, more points for the Arizona Cardinals, because as hard as they're playing, I mean, they deserve to get some of these victories. The coaching staff has been impressive, and so you do expect positive things from that perspective.
Yeah, I didn't expect a lot out of Jonathan Gannon. He's one of the bigger pleasant surprises for me for this season. I'm not ready to say that Jonathan Gannon is, one of the top 10 best coaches in the NFL or anything like that. But I do think for what was always going to be a lost season for the Cardinals, that's one of the things that you have to look at as a positive going into 2024 is that you think you might have the coach.
Yeah, and I mean, he was getting lambasted after the Super Bowl for how his defense played against the Chiefs. And while, I mentioned to you that I don't have Patrick Mahomes in my MVP discussion right now, I mean, it was against the Chiefs. You're going to give up some points to Kansas City in that situation there. You look at the Eagles and how their pass defense has collapsed in his absence. And, that combined with how hard and how well at times, especially with as overmatched as at least NFL thinkers seem to believe that Arizona happens to be, it's been an impressive debut season for him.
And I think you got to give the Cardinals credit. A lot of these teams, they go from when they have a young offensive-minded coach like Cliff Kingsbury that struggles, they want to go to, one of the retread coaches, one of the older guys, but they went to another young coach. And, we have Gannon and offensive coordinator Drew Petzing and this young staff in Arizona that I think you have to be excited.
Well, Ben, that will do it for us on an interesting, we'll say, episode of Stealing Bananas. We'd hoped for a little bit more excitement, a little bit more health in week 11, but still some very important storylines, some dynamic games, obviously some huge plays, and hopefully Monday Night Football, Chiefs, Eagles will come through and really give us the grand finale, fantasy football-wise, reality football-wise, for week 11. I can't wait for that. Maybe a little bit of a Super Bowl preview. I was saying last week, Lions over Chiefs. I don't feel as strongly about the Lions after all of the mistakes they made today, but hopefully my Chiefs will come through. At the same time, allowing our Eagles to score a lot of points. I don't want it to be Chiefs-Dolphins like we got in Europe where nobody did anything fun. So shootout tomorrow. Good luck to all of our Stealing Bananas listeners in Monday night contest. Get across the finish line. Get those victories. We're coming down to the pivotal moments here in the 2023 season. I'm Shawn Siegele. With me as always is Ben Gretch. Make sure you follow him at Yards Per Gretch. Stealing Lines, Stealing Signals, Stealing Signals Gold. That one is maybe my favorite to promote there. We'd love to have you guys over at RotoViz. Use coupon code RVRadio2023 at checkout Get a 10% coupon off your 1-year subscription. Leave us a rating and review. All of those really help us. We love you guys so much. We'll talk to you soon.